Peace and love, family. Welcome to another Read Book Club discussion. That's right, another Read Book discussion. We are reading Birth of a White Nation, The Invention of White People and Its Relevance by Dr. Jacqueline Battalora. So before we get started tonight, there were a couple of announcements I did want to make, or I do want to make. Uh, Last week, I announced that one of my comrades, Sister Paula Muhammad, transitioned. We're going to continue to send, prayers and keeping her and her family in positive thoughts. The husband, Ramsey Muhammad, he did create a GoFundMe page to help cover expenses. He's looking into the death, her death. She died under very suspicious circumstances, and so the family needs to hire a lawyer, and they're getting the autopsy done. As a matter of fact, he told me the autopsy was going to be done or performed tomorrow, and they're getting a lawyer involved and all sorts of stuff. So there is a GoFundMe page that is set up. Matter of fact, let me share my screen. All right, so here it is. This is the fundraiser right here. Okay, and I'll drop the link in the chat, or you can simply go to GoFundMe and just type in Paula's Memorial and Families Assistance. All right, and so people are definitely donating and sharing it, and so I'm gonna grab the link and drop it in the chat. So if you want to donate, you can donate. Also, family, on April the 30th, Buck Breaking, the documentary Buck Breaking by Brother Tariq Nasheed is going to drop on April the 30th. I'm working with Brother Jabari from Reality Speaks and also Brother Sundiata from Reality Speaks to coordinate a showing here in Baltimore, Brother Everett. So we're trying to have like a premiere here in Baltimore for the documentary Buck Breaking. And so I'll keep you all posted on that. I'll post something either on my, all of my social media pages once I find out the details of that. But we're trying to actually premiere it, Brother Everett, on Thursday. So it comes out Friday, but we're trying to premiere it here in Baltimore on Thursday. So I'll keep you all posted on that. And also, this upcoming Friday, one of my engineering students challenged me to a versus. Yeah, old school hip hop versus new school hip hop. So I told him I accept his challenges. I'm gonna beat the brakes off the young whippersnapper because I told him that lyrically his generation can't mess with mine. I'm an 80s baby, but the 90s were the golden ages of hip hop. And so I told him that their beats may be a little more, evolved and better than what we had, but lyrically, they can't compete with us. So this Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, join me back here. Join me back here for a versus with one of my Morgan State University engineering students at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right, so Brother Everett, we're going to kick this thing off. I want you to kick it off, brother, and introduce yourself to the people, and also just start talking about your thoughts on chapter 2 of Birth of a White Nation.
Oh, wow. Everett Winchester, Real Truth and Power Live podcast, and the Real Truth and Power All Black Trivia Game Show. Check us out on YouTube, Real Truth and Power. This book is just phenomenal. Chapter 2 really hit home. And it started off with that experiment, Dr. Maat, when the author did experiment in the classroom. And that just really blew my mind away of how and you can comment whenever you're ready, how she labeled the students in her class. I think she went every other student. One was pure. She had some pure students. Those pure students couldn't get less than maybe a C or something like that, or a B. But another group of students, they couldn't get higher than like a C plus or something like that. I could be off on the grading. So she started to introduce how labeling such as white, how she could create that in the classroom, which caught my eye and she's talking all throughout the book about how the laws created whiteness and how the laws created classifications. How she said there has to be some sort of consequence when you're labeling. So she created these kind of laws. For example, again, if you're pure, you couldn't get less than a certain grade, and if you weren't pure, you couldn't get such as a higher grade, and those are the consequences. So before she did that, all the students really didn't care about being labeled, such as if we were black or Africans and white people were Anglo-Saxon or German. It didn't really matter. But once they started putting in those laws about the grading, the students started getting irate. They started getting upset, which leads us to really what she was talking about in chapter 1, the laws. How a white woman sleeps with a black man, and then she's pretty much she got to do and be a servant and things of that nature. So I think that the way she started off the chapter about grouping her students just took care of chapter 1. It was powerful right from the start.
Absolutely. And she kept emphasizing, like you said, law as a labeling institution. So it was the law, it was the legal system that created whiteness, the human category whiteness. And the experiment that you're talking about, and you described it perfectly, Brother Everett, it reminded me of Jane Elliott's experiment, Blue Eyes, that she did when she was a classroom, when she was a teacher many years ago. And I don't know if anybody else has heard of Jane Elliott, but it's a woman, a European woman who's been very vocal about racism and the way white people think and behave. I know a lot of people started hearing about her when Killer Mike started promoting her and putting doing videos with her. But she also did an experiment. Now I want to say the name of the experiment, guys, and don't hold me to it. But I want to say that the name of the experiment was called Blue Eyes, and she did something similar. It was with elementary school children. Mm-hmm. Dr. Jacqueline Battalora, her experiment involved college students. But with Jane Elliott, she ran an experiment in her elementary school classroom many years ago, where she separated the students by eye color. So the ones who had the blue eyes were the ones who were good, and the ones, they were treated better. And then the ones who had brown eyes were treated different. And then so the kids started getting upset with one another and the bickering started, but she was doing that to prove a point, And so this experiment that Dr. Jacqueline Battalora speaks about in the beginning of chapter 2 was reminiscent of, to me, Jane Elliott's experiment. But like you said, Brother Everett, to drive it home, it shows you that no one cares about labels until there are real consequences connected with those labels. And so I also thought about, when she said that, I thought about The New Jim Crow, the book by Dr. Michelle Alexander, which speaks about how when our people are labeled as felons, again, we're talking about labeling, right? When our people are labeled as felons, and the consequences that come with being labeled as a felon, or criminal, criminal. So she said, once a black person is labeled as a felon or a criminal, they're deprived of certain rights. And so that's why she called it the new Jim Crow. So when you are labeled as a felon or a criminal, then you're disenfranchised. And so when she talked about that, the labeling, I said, oh my goodness. So not even just white, black, it expands to other labels, thinking of just once you're labeled a criminal, what happens? When you're labeled a felon, what happens? And then seeing the difference between white people who are labeled as felons and criminals versus, black people who are labeled as felons and criminals. So I thought about that too. So like you said, labels didn't matter until there were real consequences that were experienced or felt in reality, and then they say, oh, I don't want this label anymore,
Right.
And so she talked about that. But please continue.
I was going to say you hit it on the nail when you mentioned labeling as far as being criminal. because that breaks it down. If anyone didn't understand, that breaks it down and totally how criminals can vote, can purchase guns and things like that. And so you can imagine being a free black person or an indentured black servant, being able to buy your freedom, being able to purchase guns. They went from you can't carry a gun to I think you couldn't even carry a rod to strike with. And she really broke it down. So like you say, I think the main thing I really got is how she's putting the law in everything, and it's making me even think now about the laws we have today even more.
Hold up,
So.
we going to get to that because I'm telling you that I thought the same thing. But she mentions these laws, family, and I'm just going to run down the laws that were passed after the Bacon Rebellion, okay, um, which really solidified this idea of whiteness, right? All right, and so one law she talks about, I'm on page 34, Brother Everett. She said it was a package of laws that were enacted, and these are the laws. One law was the prohibition of setting slaves of African descent free, and a law making free women of African descent tithable. It says that these laws linked Africanness with the status of servitude. The next law, a prohibition against free blacks holding public office. Third law, forbade non-Europeans to be owners of Christian bond laborers, with Christian and white here overlapping. Another law excluded Africans from the armed militia. Okay. Another law, I'm at the top of page 34, Brother Everett, the prohibition against the beating or whipping of a Christian white servant while naked without an order from the justice of peace. Okay. She said that this law began to link white with an exception. I'm sorry, with an expectation. Let me repeat that. The law began to link white with an expectation of due process while denying it to those outside of its perimeters. A sixth law, it was an enactment blocking a person of African descent from testifying against a white person, and another that prohibited free blacks from possessing any weapon, including a club, gun, powder, or shot. Okay. And yet another that subjected a person of African descent to public lashing for raising a hand against any white person. She says these laws combine to render persons of African descent all but completely self-defenseless, especially against violence inflicted by a white person. It says not only do these laws enforce a human hierarchy that places white people at the top, they render the laws of those of African descent less valuable than those depraved and inhumane white person. Another law stripped African servants their ability to hold and raise livestock. All right. Another enactment listed that it required dues owed to a limited term white bond laborer. All right. And so that was another law. And so, it's called these freedom dues. So once the white servants were let go, they received freedom dues. And those dues were, it says the freedom dues provided to every white male included 10 bushels of corn, 30 shillings of money in money or equivalent in goods, a gun worth at least 20 shillings. You guys, they're Baltimore lazy tongue. and to every woman servant, 15 bushels of corn, 40 shillings in money, or the equivalent in goods. So when I saw that, Brother Everett, I thought about the 40 acres and a mule. I said, daggone. So,
Yeah.
When we, how people run that narrative that, the whites and blacks were treated equal and during that time and the laborers, well, no. Maybe, before the Bacon Rebellion, we could kind of say there was similar treatment, but really post Bacon Rebellion, you see the demarcation line drawn here. And you see that they received, I don't want to say reparations, but once they were let go, they received some help, some assistance. We didn't get our 40 acres and a mule, Brother Everett,
That's
so
right.
that's what I started thinking about. Where are our freedom dues? We're still fighting for our freedom dues, Go ahead, brother. I
Yeah,
see you want to jump in. Go ahead.
yeah. I was going to say it also affected the plantation for those that were slaves. As you have the white slaves, they started saying, "Hey, this white thing sounds pretty good. I can rock out with it. I get better privileges." So instead of them, I think that it was laws that they couldn't get whipped, but black people could stay getting whipped and things of that, or harsh, cruel treatment. I think that's what they called it. And then they started getting positions on the plantation. So instead of being out in the fields per se, they might have been on a horse supervising the slaves. So yeah, just to piggyback off of what you just said, that was kind of once they started doing that classification, the labeling, and putting that punishment in for black people, it was easy for them to get assistance on the plantation as well.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Brother Everett, can you speak on the trade in women's bodies? That's the next section. The trade in women's bodies.
Now, I think that was going into the point when they were talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Maat, I'm trying to find that now. But isn't that when they were talking
Page
about
37. Page 37.
37?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on 1 second. Let me pull that up.
The anti-miscegenation laws.
All right, hold on.
Uh-huh. So the anti-miscegenation laws that were passed when they said trade in women's bodies, now we're talking about white women bodies and black women bodies, right? And so remember, these laws were passed. That there were some laws in 1691. Says right here that Virginia's anti-miscegenation law of 1691 was the first to apply as marriage prohibitions to men and women. It punished a white woman or white man who married a person of African descent or a member of a native tribe by permanently banishing them from the colony. Just a year after the enactment of Virginia's anti-miscegenation law, the Maryland Assembly passed legislation prohibiting both white women and men from marrying a person of African descent, whether slave or free. And so, you know, what she said that these anti-miscegenation laws, essentially, she said, you know, with this, women of African descent were made capital and thus the instruments of wealth production. So even though they couldn't marry, you still had white men, you know, out here having sex with black women. And so she said, well, that's why she calls it the trade in women's bodies, because now, you know, black women bodies became an instrument of wealth production, right? But then white women's bodies became a vessel of the perpetuation of white supremacy, right? Yeah. Because that's how they wanted to keep the legacy pure, in a sense, and continue to birth white children. And that could only happen through the bodies of white women. So she calls that the trade of the trade in women's bodies. But do you want to add to that, brother?
Yeah, I think that was a crazy part of how they started passing legislation. You go from chapter 1 where white women would rather marry a black slave than a white man with money and that's a master, to changing the rules to where now, you know, the white man can have sex with his black females. It's okay by law, and get them pregnant to improve his livestock. But if a white woman does that by law, she's not considered like a pure white woman, and she gets another label, has to go into some kind of slavery, so something else. So that's when you can start seeing how they're starting to classify white women in their own little class as well. Yeah.
Exactly. And then also control the sexuality of black men, you know, and you know, and see, so what white men could virtually do whatever men who were labeled white could do, they could sleep with whoever they wanted to sleep with, but white women couldn't, right? White women couldn't. And then you had black men could not as well. Right. All right. Black men could not as well. I mean, black men couldn't sleep with whoever they wanted to. They, you know, they could sleep with black women, but they couldn't sleep with you know, other women. So they were controlling the sexuality of black men and white women at the same time. And so another thing I noticed that it says that what they were trying to prevent was, you know, they said the prevention of abominable beings. So they considered that, you know, abominable. You know, it said they called it I'm looking at it right here. They said that it was an abomination.
It's like an abomination or something.
Yeah, they said they were trying to prevent that from happening, and they, you know, just justifications that things they were doing to justify the law, the anti-miscegenations law. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think staying on the labels, because that's what she was really talking about. I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's when she started saying they really started using labels like mulatto, um, for mixed babies and things of that nature, and classifying them as a, I want to say as a I don't want to say property, but as a certain social class to a
Absolutely.
certain degree. Yeah. So that was something that it pointed me out. It's just really crazy that she mentions, and I'm glad you said that about the women's bodies and things of that nature for the white women and how they used it. Sex plays a large part of what's going on. I'm not, because I can only imagine myself having a lot of money and not being able to get a woman. It's more men than women, and you struggling to find a mate, and the laws of marriage are heavy. So you got to change that to your favor. So a sexual drive for that white person was very critical in a lot of the laws he was passing as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And so she ends this section. I'm not ends this section. Da, 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 da. Yep, she ends this section by saying post Bacon's Rebellion's laws reveal gender, class, and race as interconnected systems that support, constitute, and reconstitute each other. She said intersectionality at work. And so, like you said, there was this connection between gender, class, and race that was happening. So let's move to the next section, Brother Everett. Label sticking. So she said that it wasn't, just enough to just create the label. The
Mm-hmm.
label had to stick, right? And the label, so these labels were the label white was supported by the law or created and supported by the law, but it had to stick, right, in the minds of white people or people classified as white. So she says that, and I'm looking at, she says the elements that her students, and that's the experiment that you were talking about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
identified as necessary for a label to stick. All right. So, okay, we create these laws, we create the label, but how do we make it stick? How do we make it materialize, right, in reality? How do we make it concrete? So she says this. These are the elements. She said that the label must have consequences, and we spoke
Mm-hmm.
about that earlier. Consequences that can be readily experienced. The consequences must be such that the people generally care about. So in the context of the students, it was their grades, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, and so it says the consequences must be such that people generally care about them. The consequences serve to separate some people from others, and these differing consequences are sustained for an adequate amount of time. So this is how you make a label stick, whether it's black, white, criminal, felon. It has to be associated with consequences, consequences that people really care about. So with felons, like you said, your right to vote, your right to, I know even when you're classified as a felon, you can't even apply for certain loans for
Right.
school.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, when you're classified as a felon, you can't vote. You can't apply for certain loans. You can't even live in certain apartments. They run a background check on you and they say, oh, you're a felon. You can't live in that. You can't live in that development. And so those are consequences that people care about, right? And so,
Yeah.
so she's saying that. And so I agree 100% with her. And she said when that happened, when they created the laws and when they created those consequences, then the line began to be drawn between the European laborers and the African laborers. All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, brother. It seemed like you want to jump in.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the consequences and how she says the consequences had to be. They weren't just consequences that people generally cared about. It was influencing the quality of life. Consequences that had the potential to impact everyone's very survival. So
Mm,
yeah, and so I'm like, wow, that's just puts that puts things in perspective. Yeah, they're not just passing laws just to separate us by, like you said, her little experiment was like grades, but I guess you can look at it, grades, a bad grade, and flex how you graduate and flex your life. They're putting things into even deeper perspective of slavery and things of that nature. They wanted to make sure those laws had consequences that would definitely affect Black people's lives. That's just, it's just crazy how they were sitting back thinking of all of this back then when everything
absolutely.
wasn't, yeah, it wasn't even like that before.
Absolutely. And it for me, it really drove home that they thought about this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
like it was a lot of effort and a lot of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of time, a lot of energy into developing this human category of white and making sure that the divide and conquer strategy. I mean, we talk about it, oh, it's a divide and conquer, but it was a lot of there's a lot of energy, thought, and time that was put into developing this human, the label whiteness. And I mean, it's, I guess it was mind boggling of just how intricate, like how intricate this thing is. It's not as simplistic as people think it is. And I'm talking
Right.
about like this whole idea of race and this divide and conquer. These people really strategized and they thought about this stuff, and it worked, because here we are in 2021,
Yeah.
still calling people black, white, still using these labels that were created 400 almost 400 years ago. We said 1691, so
Yeah.
almost, like 300-400 years ago, and we're still utilizing these labels. There's still a division amongst the lower, the middle class and lower middle class and poor, blacks and whites. This stuff is still working 300 years later.
It's powerful. I mean, they changed the especially for Maryland and Virginia, because wasn't even the United States yet, it was still colonies. They changed the whole perspective of the world today with racism and the laws that they passed. It's just amazing how, you know, not even founded colonies could create such a thing that would change the aspect of how we look at each other and deal with each other culturally.
No, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And so the last section, well, this is the second to the last section, white as ideology,
Mm-hmm.
social structure, and race. So she said, through the package of laws passed by Virginia lawmakers following the Bacon's Rebellion, colonial lawmakers worked to invent the human category white and constituted not just rules that constructed a boundary between social order and criminality, but the rules of whiteness. So
Mm.
she's saying that following this label, following the laws, following this label came an entire ideology. And peace the brother Tiwolo in the chat, brother JT Coin Rings. He read the blueprint for Black Power by Dr. Amos Wilson with us, right? And
Mm.
when we read it, Dr. Amos Wilson talked about, it was an acronym. I remember it as an acronym, but it was IEMP. And he was saying, in order to control, I don't know if he said the world, or I don't know if he said the world or this country, but he talked about how you had to control the ideology, the economics, the military, and
Mm.
P, the politics. He said
Mm.
that's what you had to control. So when I read this section, and she said, along with, the label white, came laws. Well, laws created whiteness. So along with the laws came the label, and along with the label came consequences, right, that were supported
Mm-hmm.
by the law. But she said an ideology was ushered in of whiteness, and a social structure, a social arrangement was created out of that. But go ahead and speak to that, brother Everett. I see you want to give.
Yeah. Yeah, that she really talked about ideology as a means, a set of ideas about reality. Sometimes ideology is understood as a way of looking at something that renders it common sense. So it's kind of like they're creating an ideology for white. They're creating this new thing, and they're setting the groundwork to push it out. Um, it's just powerful how this all started. I'm still kind of shocked.
It's mind boggling, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's just
yeah. It's
like
just kind of
it's
like,
like, oh my goodness,
right. You were sitting there thinking of all of this from nothing. It's kind of like you think we could easily change it back, but it's so deep and ingrained that the laws of how they change things. It's sad. It's really sad.
Absolutely. And I love at the bottom of this. So she says that with these, so you have a label, you have the laws, you have these real life consequences. So these sets of ideas, ideology, it gave birth to a set of ideas, an ideology of whiteness, right? And so I love at the bottom, she says a lot of perceptions started to form, right? She says right here, she said people started forming perceptions. White folks, right? started forming perceptions about being white and classified as white and what it means to be white. And so did black folks. You know, people who were considered non-white started forming perceptions of what it means to be white and what it means to be non-white. And I love down here, I'm at the bottom of page 44. She said the message of white authority in turn shaped perceptions of self, group, and others. So remember, now that white people, or those who are classified as white, are viewed as superior, you know, now they're viewed as authority figures, right? So she said this message of white authority in turn shaped perceptions of self, group, and others. It will be hard for those labeled white to escape at least some level of internalization of the idea that they are better than those seen as not white.
Right.
Impacting one's sense of self and one's sense of the group to which they are a part. Conversely, it would be equally as unlikely that one could fully escape internalizing the message that those who are not white are less valuable. She says, so finally, the laws direct all white people to see themselves as a unified group via this value in authority and through a claim to purity that attached to their status as white. So think about this. This is where my mind went back to. Jane Elliott, a video went viral. She called all white people racist. She said, if you're not racist, you're a miracle. She said, you're a miracle. She said, you are a miracle if you're white. And yet she said, if you're white and you're not a racist, she said, you're a miracle. And she said, and then she started getting into like the education system and how you're groomed to feel like you're superior to other people. And so I love how Dr. Jacqueline Battalora down here, she said, you know, it'll be hard for those labeled white to escape at least some level of internalization of the idea, right? That they are better than those seen as not white. And Jane Elliott said the only way you could do that as a white person if you made the effort to re-educate yourself. Yeah. That's the only reason why you could escape it, you know? And so I love it. So I thought of Jane Elliott a lot when I was reading, you know, some of Dr. Jacqueline Battalora's work. And so remember, Brother Everett, also, so they created these laws. Then out of these laws and out of the label came the ideology of whiteness, okay, or the rules of whiteness, because of perceptions that were then being formed by people who are labeled as white and those labeled as non-white. But then she speaks about the propagandizing efforts. Remember, I told you this, and you all can go back. I don't know if it was during chapter 1's discussion or when we were discussing the intro, but I said, I've noticed, and this is just little old me making my observations. I said, I noticed whenever they want to normalize a behavior, any behavior, they legalize it first. They legalize it, or they make a law. I said, and then they promote it, right? They promote it, you know, and then they teach it. They teach it, or it's in the education system. So I came up with this: to normalize, you have to legalize, advertise, edify, right? So I'm going to say that again. To normalize a behavior, you have to legalize, advertise, edify. So you have to legalize it, then advertise it in the media, and then edify it through where? Your educational institutions. She talks about the propagandizing efforts. I'm in the middle paragraph on page 45. I'm sorry, page 45. She says that let me get here, guys. I'm sorry. She said, if enforcement of the laws passed after Bacon's Rebellion was not enough to impress upon colonists the idea that white people are an identifiable group who are essentially different from, in fact, superior to those excluding from the category, then propagandizing efforts imposed by Virginia lawmakers serve to clarify. Once each spring and each fall, parish clerks or church wardens were required to read in full the laws at the conclusion of Sunday service, while sheriffs were required to do so as well at the courthouse door.
That's the part that really messed me up. I was just about to say that too. I didn't know how far you was going to go. Can you imagine in a church they're going over laws to separate and class empower white people and black people, and then to talk about making sure everybody knows it? It's crazy. It's crazy. And it also goes into the point of how they use the church as a source of racism and enslavement. Just on that alone, they made it a point to make sure that they went over there after Sunday service, as well as making sure the sheriff made sure everybody in the land knew that this thing whiteness is going to be a go. It's just crazy. It's crazy. I'm glad you mentioned that part. I thought that was one of the most powerful parts of the chapter.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I could agree. I could agree more. I thought so too. I was like, wow, they were using the church. But you know what? We're not surprised that they were. I mean, they were
Right,
using
right,
the
right.
church to sanction slavery.
That's
You
right.
know, they were using. I mean, remember it was a ship named Jesus that brought
That's right.
our people over. So they were using the church with all up in they were using. They've been weaponizing the church, weaponizing the Bible, and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, I had oh yeah. So then it talks about it. She goes into the social structure that came about. So she said an ideology and a social structure formed, right? By social structure, she says it refers to pattern social arrangements that impact individual actions, right? So there was a pattern social arrangements that impacted individuals' actions. So as a result of these laws, these consequences, the benefits that came along with being whites, the perceptions, it brought rise or gave rise to ideology. It gave rise to a social structure, a social hierarchy that still exists, Brother Everett.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, she says that these laws created an entirely new tier of laborers, poor whites, an entirely new bottom to the social hierarchy, enslaved persons of African origin and free persons of African descent with very narrow rights and freedoms. And I have always marked my books up, Brother Everett. So you can see along the column, I have little, I don't know if y'all can see my little scratches. But
Yes.
yeah, I was thinking that this is still true today. It's
Yes.
still, we're still at the bottom of the social hierarchy today. So this hierarchy that was created over 300 years ago, we are still experiencing it. We're still feeling it. And so she said the laws literally made white people more valuable by allocating more rights and resources to them, still true today, largely by stripping them from those of African descent and members of native tribes. So still true today. Do you want to jump in on that, brother?
Yes, and she went into and again, always talking about those laws, about not having a gun, possession of a firearm, not having a political voice, and how all of this divides the lines of humanity. She says she uses that as divides the lines of humanity, and comparing white to Negro, mulatto and Indian, things of that nature. And everything always goes back to, like you said, that Bacon's Rebellion, which I never heard of until I read the book, which really makes me think that must have been one powerful rebellion, something that really put a lot of fear in whites, plantation owners, or what have you, to sit back and say, we got to do something, create these laws and change the way we view ourselves and the way we view them, and make sure that we push it. So yeah, I think that was that socialization is very important, and the ideology part was very important as she ended the chapter.
Absolutely. And she did. She ended the chapter with, she said, a return to social constructionism. So she ended, like you said, the chapter by saying, look, this that whiteness, or the term white, it's a social construct. It came about, or was developed from human activity. And she said, look, she said, prior to that, people were Spanish, they were Dutch, they were, Irish, they were Portuguese, but she said that this label of whiteness, like you said, Brother Everett, and you drove it home perfectly. It came about as a strategy to divide and conquer, and to make sure that something like Bacon Rebellion would never happen again. And they were successful, because nothing like that has happened again.
That's right.
Nothing like that has happened again. I know a lot of people were trying to say, when George Floyd was murdered, they were saying that it shocked everyone around the world, and you had black folks happy to walk arm in arm with white folks, at the protests, and for black folks, oh, this is like the Bacon's Rebellion. They're uniting everybody. Nothing changed for black people after that.
No.
So
Right.
so Bacon's Rebellion, with Bacon Rebellion, they were trying to overthrow the elite. They were
right.
trying to overthrow the system. And so when people kept saying that the George Floyd protests reminded them of Bacon's rebellion, I said, "Oh my goodness!" I said, "Our people need to do some
Right.
more reading because that nothing changed for us after George Floyd. I mean, look at what happened right during the verdict. Somebody else was shot, and so
Uh-huh.
so we can't confuse the two people. A lot of people, oh, it's like the Bacon's Rebellion when the white people out there protesting with us. No, the Bacon's Rebellion, they were trying to overthrow the system.
That's
These just
right.
some white folks who just feel some type of way because they watched it on TV and they're probably a little bit empathetic, so they came out. But they're not trying. I don't know of a collective group of white folks that are in a movement trying to overthrow the elite right now. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm out of the loop, brother
No, it's
Everett.
not. It's not you. In fact, I would consider the Bacon's Rebellion closer to that incident at the Capitol. You going up, you going to the Capitol, causing some noise, busting up in there. I think that's more inclined to how how that Bacon's Rebellion was. They went straight to making some noise, pushing to the government, marching, just so somebody can feel your pain is a little different.
It's a little different.
Yeah, it's a little
Exactly.
different. It's a little
Exactly,
different.
brother Everett. So she drives home at the end of the chapter that, look, white is a social construct. It was made up as a result of human activity. And she said there's no biological reality or biological basis for, a group of white people. She said it's just not. It's just not. And so anyway, brother Everett, do you have any closing words regarding chapter 2?
No, I'm just learning. This book is just very educational. I mean, it takes you through a process of just how all of this stuff started, and kind of educates you on how it was before actually this that ignorant, demeaning form of slavery started to coexist. So I just can't wait for chapter 3.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to chapter 3. Let me see what the title of chapter 3 is.
You read my mind. I was just going there myself.
Oh, look at this. The Americanization of whites.
Uh-oh.
Oh, the Americanization of whites. Chapter 3. So, family, join us back here, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays. The R.E.A.D Book Club. I'm wearing a shirt.
Mine's on the way. It's on
Yeah,
the
you
way.
say yours on the way.
It's
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
way.
yeah. Regain, elevate, aspire, determine. The R.E.A.D Book Club. So this is the shirt, and you all can reach out to hockey_customs. As a matter of fact, let me put his handle up here. If you're on Instagram, or let me put this up for you. If you're on Instagram, this is his handle. Okay, and if you're not on Instagram, you can email Brother Haki here. And let me put this on the screen for you all. All right, this is Brother Haki. This is his email address because some of you say, Dr. Maat, I'm not on Instagram. My family was trying to, Brother Everett, I broke down. One of my family members created an Instagram account for me. I said, look,
It's
I've been
hard.
on. It's hard. I'm
It's
not
hard.
really, then you got to post and you got to keep on,
People send me messages on Instagram. I don't even know where to check them. I'm like, they say you didn't get the message. I'm like, I got to figure it out. So
right.
I got to get my daughters to help me with that for sure.
Exactly. And so, family, join us back here, same time, same place. Also, Buck Breaking. Well, one of the brothers in the chat, he said, you did a wonderful job in the Buck Breaking movie. So some people have already seen the movie, but I was told that it's going to be officially released. I don't know if he allowed people to preview it or get pre-order it, or if they had, a copy. I don't know, but some people have already saw it. I'm getting hit up. Oh, Doc, he was good in it. And I was like, daggone, I haven't even seen the movie. But we're trying to organize a showing of Buck Breaking in Baltimore on Thursday or Friday of this week. And so I will definitely post more information when I get it. Join me here on Friday. I got a student from Morgan State, one of my engineering students. He's challenging me to Mr. Corey, Brother Corey said I got the pre-release. Okay. So he got the pre-release. Yeah, hey, brother Corey. When I spoke to Tariq on Saturday, he said, I was in there a lot, and I don't know. What's your opinion, brother Corey? Because there's a lot of heavy hitters in there, man. So,
Yes.
brother Tariq said, "Oh, but I had you all through there." So I don't know, brother Corey. Let me know in the chat. What if I was in there a lot, or I don't know. I'm just excited. I'm excited to be a part of the project. Like I said, it was a lot of heavy hitters on there, brother Everett. So I was surprised when he said I had you all through there. I was like, wait a minute.
You gotta let me know about that premiere. I gotta try to get there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But we're gonna I'll let you know as soon as I find out from brother Jabari and brother Sundiata. I'll post it, and like I said, I'll call you up and let you know and let the people know. And also my student is challenging me to a verses, guys. Wow,
And
brother
the whole
Corey said,
movie,
wow, he just said in there, he
beginning
said,
to end.
wow, that's crazy. Oh my goodness, you got me super excited, brother Corey. You got me super excited. I was super nervous too. I was like, Tariq,
Really?
yeah, I was
I
nervous when
saw
he
the
was
trailer you sent. You just was like you was your regular self flowing, so I couldn't tell.
I was nervous. I kept saying to him, and he and I were laughing about this because I came prepared. I had a whole bunch of notes. I came prepared, and he's like, Doc, he's like, you're not. He said, this isn't a this isn't a lecture, Doc. He said, this is not like you teach in class and you got to carry, the lecture for an hour, hour and a half. He said, I got a lot of people, and I'm gonna be interviewing and taking, snips. So he said, just talk. Let's just have a conversation. So that's when I relaxed and I said, oh, okay, because I came prepared to teach,
Right.
and he said, no, sister, just, and he just sat back and he just talked to me, and
Wow.
I sat back and had a conversation with him. But going back to my student, one of my students at Morgan challenged me to a versus old school hip hop versus new school hip hop, old school hip hop versus the new school hip hop. And he said, Dr. Bailey, I think, my generation, this is like, I always, and brother Everett, with my students, and a lot of them are going to be on the live stream on Friday. And I'm going to bring a couple of them on to kind of just talk about what it's like being in my class. I try to connect with my students.
Right.
I try to figure out what they like, and just try to connect, because when you're educating someone, is the concept of creating the whole, you're educating the whole person. Like, you gotta make that connection. You want students to know that you care about them, that you're interested, or you care about their interests. And so you got to make that connection. So with this particular brother, his is music. He loves hip hop. He loves music. And so at the class, we would chop it up about, music and stuff like that. And he challenged me, and I said, okay. But what the young whippersnapper doesn't know is that I'm bringing a DJ, one of the DJs in Baltimore. DJ 5 Star is going to be in the building. So I'm going to have a DJ with me. I mean, I'm going to tell the DJ the songs that I want to hear, of course, but it's going to be really live on Friday at 8 p.m. So please be here, family, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This Friday, I'm going up against one of my students, old school hip hop versus the new school stuff. So I'm going to be playing stuff from 80s, 90s, 2000s. So from when I was a little girl up through college, I'll be playing that stuff. And he's 20. So he's going to be playing, the songs that he enjoyed listening to from elementary school through college. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. Yeah. All right, family. So we out of here. Peace and Black Power.